Well, hello everyone. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Welcome to our Fortuna series on everything you wanted to know about the MBA, but may have been afraid to ask. Today, first up, and this is a great series, we're going to talk about scholarships and funding, the GMAT versus the GRE, the most common MBA interview mistakes. Is the MBA worth it? And today, it's how to get into a top MBA program. Now, those of you who know what YHP is may not know what HSW is. It's Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. And with us to discuss how to get into three of the most highly selective business schools in the world is Judith Hodara. Let me introduce Judith with a little more detail. For nearly 20 years, she worked in admissions at the University of Pennsylvania. She had been head of the admissions committee at Wharton. She traveled throughout Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, recruiting MBA students, interviewed thousands of MBA applicants for Wharton, ultimately was acting admissions director of the Wharton School, and is a co-founder of Fortuna and a longtime friend. Hi, Judith.
Good morning. I'm so glad to be here, John, and thank you everybody for welcoming me this morning.
And it's great to see you again. Now, when I think Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, um, it almost gives me the jitters, and I'm not even an MBA applicant because I know what the acceptance rates are at those schools. And I know that the applicant pools reflect a level of quality that, frankly, at least 50%, maybe even 80% of the applicant pool can get into any one of these schools. Yet at Stanford, fewer than 10% do. At Harvard,
Mhm.
probably 11, 12% get in. At Wharton, it's like 18. So, how do you crack the code?
I love that question. And, it is a hard code to crack. And I think that it's very much for admissions directors and admissions committee, it's an art and it's not a science. And that may be frustrating for some applicants who sort of want to know if I do this and I do this and I score that, and this is what my recommender says, am I going to be admitted? And without a doubt, having sat on these admissions committees for a long time, it is very much how it is that you're putting together your entire application, how your personality and your background is coming through. And
Yes.
believe it or not, each of the schools has a different approach. So, although there is no sort of formula, I'm happy to talk with you about some of the differences between the schools and what they might be looking for.
Let's start on the West Coast.
Okay.
Stanford, which is the most selective of the three.
Well, the West Coast, as everybody knows, their question really is getting to the heart of the matter. What matters most to you and why? And I think that nothing really embodies the Stanford spirit more than this question. They are really looking to dig deep and to understand what it is you're bringing if you become a part of that GSB community. So they're looking, not surprisingly, for a very, very high pattern of excellence and performance professionally and academically. But in addition to that, they're looking for a narrative. They really want to understand what gets you out of bed in the morning. And not surprisingly, it's a question and an application process that I suggest that students start with, because I really do think that it digs down into the foundation of what Stanford is trying to do as they build their class. And inevitably, showing that you're able to be an agent of change is going to be very, very important for Stanford. There's no doubt that it is well regarded as a place that makes things happen, not only because of its alumni base, but also because it's where it's located and sort of, where it started in the heart of Silicon Valley. So those are certainly key topics that I talk to students about. You really want to be able to express who you are and what you intend to do with that GSB background. So, how are you going to make your own imprint on the world as a result of the education and the community that you're a part of?
And that question invites deep introspection and almost in many cases, to me, an intimate response.
It really does. And I recognize that this might not be easy for everyone that's going through the process. It takes some time. This is not the kind of thing that you can sit down on a Sunday night and decide you're going to, put together. It really is helping to get your story out. And what I say to students all the time is there's a lot of things that have gotten you to where you are today. family upbringing, experiences that you've had, mentors, classmates, friends, and other experiences that really help you achieve who you are at 24, 25, 26 years old. So all of these pieces are going to be part of what you're going to be sharing with Stanford. And I think it's important to keep in mind that they don't want a repetition of your resume. They
Mm,
don't want a repetition of these are my accomplishments. They're looking, if you can, we talk sometimes about peeling the onion or digging deep and going one layer below to really get to the heart of the matter. And it's the motivation that matters to Stanford, I believe, more than the actual outcome. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Stanford is as interested in the process as they are in the final product.
what about Harvard?
What about Harvard? Well, it's, on the opposite coast, obviously, from Stanford, and definitely has a different ethos overall. I think Harvard is very well regarded, obviously, worldwide, consistently ranked in the top group of schools, and usually the school that we hear the most frequently about from our clients at Fortuna. Harvard certainly is looking for a habit of leadership, things that you've done in your undergrad and your professional life that have led you to this point in your life and your career. You have a demonstrated record of success as you do at Stanford. But I would say also that Harvard is really driven by people that are mission focused. So they're looking for sort of a deeper purpose and understanding how, again, that education is going to make an impact on the world.
Mm.
And I think traditionally they are thought of as very much a leadership institution. That doesn't mean that they don't have entrepreneurship and innovation. And of course they do. I mean, the three schools we're talking about today, John, are so impactful in those realms. But I think that Harvard also has a bit more because of its relationships with some of the other schools on its campus. It definitely has that very deep dive into leadership. And also, who are you is Harvard's fundamental question. And it's something that we really encourage students to think about deeply, and it helps to build the foundation for other essay questions that they may be working on. And one thing I could also say about Harvard is it's not always evident who it is that they're going to be admitting. You can't point to a certain group of students and say, aha, that's what they're looking for. Because I talked to an opera singer yesterday that graduated 2 years ago and is now working in theater. So, you never know what you're going to get. And I think that Harvard is really open to those possibilities.
And that's a function of the class size as well, don't you think? Because Harvard is
Mhm,
going to enroll like 930 or so students a year,
mhm.
Stanford far fewer. So Harvard, in a way, can take a few more risks.
I believe that's true. And also because of the ways that Harvard has their first year class really going through all of the same classes, everyone sort of has the same schedule. That is definitely different than the picking and choosing that may go on in first year curriculums, excuse me, in other schools. And I think that that's important to keep in mind that because of the Harvard size, you may not know everyone in your class as intimately as you do if you were to be at the GSB, for example, but you're going to certainly find pockets of people that you have a great deal in common with, and learn from people that are totally, totally different than your own educational and professional background. And I think that Harvard really prides itself on having this collection of individuals that together make this really, really robust community.
Now let's go back to your old stomping grounds at Wharton.
I'm happy to do that. And if I look out my window, I could wave at the Huntsman Hall building. It's a school that traditionally has really drawn a lot from Wall Street. That when it was founded back in the 1800s, that was sort of, educating young men at the time. It was only young men, to really go back and make a difference in banking. And certainly that has changed so much since that time. And Wharton is very much about team orientation. As many of you know that are listening to this and have done your research, the first year is all about those cohorts and clusters and learning teams, and so that you're coming together with people again like the size of Harvard. The Wharton incoming class is large, and so you're going to be with very disparate people throughout your learning team experience. And from my experiences watching the team put together these groups of individuals, they are going to pull folks from all over the world, from all different academic and professional backgrounds. And one thing that Wharton really wants to understand, and their questions for those of you that are, following this, are a little bit more pragmatic than those of Harvard and Stanford. And I think that that's important to recognize that Wharton is really looking to understand that you know what you want to do with this degree, that your career plans are pretty, clear. You don't necessarily have to achieve what you set out to do in your application, but it's good to know I'm going to graduate and this is going to happen and then this is going to happen. And at least it's an idea that kind of makes sense for you. And not surprisingly, career management at times will sit in on the admissions committees to help guide some of these conversations. Wharton really wants to make sure that you're going to be successful when you graduate, whatever path that is, in entrepreneurship, in real estate, in marketing, in finance, not surprisingly, and strategy. So Wharton definitely has changed their outlook since the late 1800s, but I
Mm,
think that they're also looking for individuals that are going to bring a lot to that community as well from a variety of backgrounds.
right. Now, I've heard, and this is kind of like a stereotype really about these schools, that HBS prefers leaders to the GSB, Stanford prefers innovators, and that Wharton, of course, prefers people from the finance field. What if you don't fit into one of these buckets?
Well, I love people that don't fit into those buckets. And to be honest, I spent a lot of time when I was at Wharton looking for the people that weren't in those buckets. So if you happen to be in those buckets, that's terrific. No cause for concern. And on the flip side, if you are coming from a very non-traditional background, if you've been a teacher or you've been working, building a small company, or you've been working in the arts. These are all things that Wharton and Harvard and Stanford are actively looking to bring to their community. It is very easy to fill a class with 800 consultants that all got, terrific scores on their GMAT and have done the following 7 things. What is less easy is for schools to create an environment and, if you will, a small town
Hmm,
of, more or less about 1,000 people in some cases that are going to bring this richness of experience to one another. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind. You are more than what you do for a living. You are more than where you went to school, and you are more than your standardized test scores. So I think when we start speaking with students, John, they come to us at times a little nervous, how am I going to stack up against the competition? And what we say to them is, what is so important is that you tell your story. Because I might be sitting next to someone that has had the same career path, but we've had very different views on where we want to go next, or what it
right.
is that matters to us, or what gets us out of bed in the morning. And so we really feel as a group of advisors that it's important to spend some time with yourself and understand what's going to make you special to these schools as an individual.
It makes me wonder what Harvard saw in that opera singer who graduated from Harvard Business School 2 years ago. What do you think?
I think that this person brought a very different approach, had been on stage, had managed her own brand, recognized how to audition successfully globally, was working with casting directors and, singing trainers and cast members and management. So in a way, this person was not just a performer, but she was really a business, if you want to look at it like that. And I know this is a little
Fascinating.
bit of a strange example,
Yeah,
but
no.
just, she really was able, it's almost as if she had experienced all different stages of a small company organization, and
Mm.
how she saw herself within that universe. And so it doesn't mean that just because you're not at Goldman Sachs or Deloitte, you still have had, in many cases, a very rich organizational experience, and you're bringing that regardless of what industry, to your business school experience.
Yeah, now here's someone who obviously would not have known how to do a discounted flow analysis or even do basic accounting. But it doesn't matter because
Yeah.
she was entrepreneurial and managing
Yeah.
her own personal brand.
Yeah, 100%. And I should say,
Yeah.
John, we have had more than a handful of artistic folks come through and work with us at Fortuna, and we love it. I think we probably at this point could probably have a small theater company based on everybody we've worked with that's been in the arts, which to us is just delightful. It's such a great balance of individuals that we get to meet during this process.
So obviously, there are people who walk on water. Very few,
Hmm. Hmm.
admittedly, very few. But most people don't have a perfect resume, a perfect background,
Right.
perfect stats. Maybe in undergraduate school, they goofed around a little bit and their GPA is well below the average. Maybe they're bad standardized test takers. So in the GMAT or the GRE, they don't quite hit the average for the class. Or maybe they weren't at a McKinsey, a Goldman Sachs, a Google. How do you still get into HSW?
HSW. Well, it's funny that you mentioned Walk on Water because between you and I and everybody else that's watching this, Walk on Water, or WOW, was one of the acronyms that we used when I was on the admissions committee at Wharton.
Oh, really?
So
Wow.
sometimes that would be the final WOW. And if we have time later on, I'll fill you in on some of the other little abbreviations that we used for people that were applying. So I think, again, going back to that idea that no one is 100% infallible. And if you were, you probably wouldn't be going to business school. I say that to students all the time. If you knew everything there was to know about a discounted cash flow, you probably wouldn't be bothering applying, right? All these other experiences and people and opportunities that are going to be part of your experience at any of these schools, that is going to be the piece that is going to help you evolve into the next part of your professional and personal life. So to come in and think, oh my gosh, I have to have been best in class undergrad at my consulting firm or at my startup, and then have a perfect score on the GMAT or the GRE, and then have outstanding recommendations, from everybody. Sometimes it doesn't happen. And sometimes when you're 18, you sleep through anthropology a couple of times too many, and you end up with a C. I'm not speaking from experience or anything in that regard. But I think what's important to keep in mind, John, is that schools are schools because they want you to learn from them, and they are interested in the things that make life a little bit messy. And so that is really where the learning happens. And I'll tell you, when we were working in admissions, when I was at Wharton, and it was the dot-com bubble had burst,
All right.
and we had a lot of people that were coming to us saying, I failed. Is that a problem? It didn't work. We didn't get funding. I'm out of a job. And I said to them, that's the most beautiful thing that could have happened to you. Because trust me, you have learned a lot more from that failure than you did from the success. You had to figure out how to get through the tough times and to really motivate yourself and think of the next idea and be creative. So to us in admissions and now as an advisor, I think those parts that didn't go so well are the parts that really help to build who you are as an individual and where your character is coming from. I will also add, and this is not surprising, John, all the schools give you a chance to sort of say, look, freshman year wasn't so great. Somebody was sick. I was working full time. I, switched my major. All of these things are acceptable. But like anything, when you crash the car, you got to tell mom and dad, right? So you want to make sure, John, that you let the admissions know. And because if you don't tell them, they're going to have to make it up. And trust me, you don't want admissions officers making up your backstory, because we got pretty creative. So if there's a little hiccup along the way, own it, talk about it, and move on.
Get it out there. Be
Get it
proactive.
out there,
Getting it
right?
out there. Exactly. So, what's your top piece of advice for candidates who aspire to these three schools?
That being yourself is so important, and not thinking about the person sitting next to you or this person that is talking about it incessantly, when you're out with friends. It is a process that is a wonderful process for you as a person to go through. No other time in your life are you going to have this opportunity for introspection. No other time in your life are you going to be able to say, where am I? And where do I envision going? And what is it that matters to me? What motivates me career wise, personal wise? How do I see the next 10 years unfolding? So I love the business school application process because I really look at it as a journey. I know everyone is so excited about those deadlines and getting those answers, but that run up, that 6 months, 9 months before you actually hit submit is an opportunity for you to really take stock, and in many cases figure it out and go through this understanding and self-awareness. So again, I would say my top piece of advice is to just take a deep breath and be authentic, and don't try to hold yourself up to anybody else, because what really matters in this process is you.
Good advice. Judith, I can't think of another person I'd rather have coaching me in the race
Oh, thank
to
you
get
so
in.
much. I
I mean, really,
appreciate that. It's a delight to talk with
just
you.
listening to you, it's incredibly comforting, and reassuring.
That's me. I am the reassurer, definitely. I'll tell it to you straight, but I'm also incredibly, I believe I have a lot of faith in folks' ability.
So, Judith, if a candidate would like to contact you or a colleague of yours at Fortuna and get the process started, what should they do?
You can email us at info@fortunaadmissions.com. You can also go directly to our website, which is fortunaadmissions.com, and click on the free consult button. And the last thing you can do if you're interested is you can reach me as well, judith.hodara@fortunaadmissions.com. We love speaking with prospective students, and we hope to hear from you.
All right. Well, Judith, thank you. Always a pleasure. And for all
Thank
of
you.
you out there, I hope you got the steak and not the sizzle from this session with Judith Hodara, a co-founder of Fortuna Admissions, on how to get into a top MBA program. This is one in a series with Fortuna on everything you need to know about the MBA, but may be afraid to ask. Look for the rest of them. I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants.